Highway Romance novel, Save the Galaxy, by Ariana de Relte. Chapter 50, Femor 7. Crichton's mission had a few parameters. The first was to provide the Jedi with any backup he needed on his mission and be ready to call in backup if they got over their heads. The second was not to hit on the man, which was easy. Crichton was loyal to Ali's memory, and the young man was at least 20 years younger than him, if he had to make his guess. The third, unofficial one, which Crichton had decided on while slicing the port's manifest for a Jedi craft registration, was that he should avoid the topic of Jinn. The Jedi's actions on Mandalore spoke of a man who was still traumatized by being raised by the Shabur. After seeing the Jedi covered in dust and looking harried and paranoid, he thought it was probably the right decision. The Mirialan pilot of the ship introduced themselves as Alajade. After takeoff, she showed them around the small ship in single-clip sentences. Kitchen? Pressure? Your bunks? My bunks. Crichton found themselves sharing an amused look with the Jedi over the pilot's brusqueness. It would take them a few days to rendezvous with the Explore Praxium ship, the Sunrider, which was explained to him as being essentially a mobile temple for research. Crichton allowed Femor to avoid him for the first day in order to let him calm down. However, he refused to continue on the mission without them coming to an accord. Plus, he needed to know what Femor needed of him for this mission. Possibly having to go undercover was a bit too broad for Crichton's tastes. So after dinner, on the second day, he pulled out a flask of tihar, took a sip, and offered it to Femor. I have some questions about the mission. Want to do an exchange? Question for question? Femor regarded him warily, though he did take a sip of the tihar.
Any questions?
Love life and Jinn are off limits, Attica. Femor looked surprised, but Crichton was pleased to see he relaxed once those two topics were off the table.
You called me that before. What does it mean?
Asked Femor, taking another sip of the tihar before passing it back to him. Not sure what it means in Standard. All those gendered words in Standard were so confusing. When used to a child, it means kid, but for adults, it's like an informal way of saying man or woman. Are there gendered words for that?
Femor looked thoughtful. Maybe guy for man? The lack of gender in Mandoa must make learning Standard a bit confusing.
Crichton grinned. It was actually the hardest thing for me to keep straight when I started working undercover. Thank the Manda that they is the acceptable gender-neutral pronoun across the galaxy. Speaking of undercover, what exactly do you think we'll need to do? I want to be prepared.
Femor looked a bit embarrassed. I'm not really sure, but I'm thinking we'll be investigating Service Corps members who have deviated from Jedi norms. Either someone who's off on the edges of known space and rarely reports back in, or someone who is broadly interpreting some of the Jedi tenets. That may require us to look at non-threatening as possible when we approach.
So we'll know more once you figure out who are our potential targets.
Yes, I've got a list we'll hopefully narrow down on the Sunrider.
That was what Crichton needed to know, but if Femor was willing to talk more, he'd prefer to get to know his partner on this mission. Your turn for a question.
Do you have any kids?
Said Femor after a moment's thought. Crichton had to hand it to him. That would usually be an excellent question to get a Mandalorian talking. Unfortunately, it was a bit of an issue for him. I've never wanted kids, said Crichton. I was always afraid I'd cork them up somehow. Plus, I spend my life undercover 80% of the time.
Femor raised an eyebrow. Is that even allowed for Mandalorians?
He backpedaled when Crichton sent him an unamused look.
I mean, your culture adores children. The Mandalore told me that children can disown their parents. I can't think of a single other culture I've heard of that allows that.
Crichton sighed. I do like children, and that's usually enough for most Mandalore. But you're right, it can cause difficulties to actually state you don't want kids. He'd even had a few brawls over it. I've been told by many that someday the perfect ad will fall into my lap, and I'll want to adopt them. And if I were the only option for a kid, I'd do it because I do believe children are our future. But fortunately for me, there's never a shortage of Mandalore wanting to adopt. I can continue to be the fun Bavodu to my friends, Ade.
Bavodu?
Uncle, though I'm also a Babur, that's grandparent, to at least one at this point. I'm getting old, or maybe I just need younger friends. He smiled at the well-worn joke. Femor returned his smile.
My apologies for bringing it up then. I feel the same way about taking a Padawan. I'd always be so worried they'd treat them all the same way I was treated.
If you're aware of it, you probably wouldn't, said Crichton. But I understand. They exchanged another smile. Crichton offered him more tihar, first step of getting to know his mission partner complete. Next, he talked the Jedi into sparring so they wouldn't get in each other's way if they were in a fight. But first, I believe it's my turn. Just how much can you lift with the Force?
Well,
Femur was surprised how quickly the trip to the Sunrider had gone once he let Crichton talk him into getting to know each other. He'd rather belatedly realized that both Erta and Jaster had been teasing him with their threats to send amorous Mandalorians on the mission with him. Instead, they'd chosen a professional who would be excellent backup, even if Femur still maintained he didn't really need it. Crichton had insisted they spar together so they get an idea of how each other worked in battle and taught him a few hand signs so he could direct Crichton without sound on the mission. The Sunrider was obviously devoted to research over anything else. The ship had the meditation and training rooms you would expect in a mobile Jedi temple, but there was an entire floor filled with laboratories and equipment, a huge library to rival the archives, and an atrium which was always projecting various star maps. Meditating Jedi settled amongst the constellations. It's beautiful, said Crichton gruffly when they saw the atrium. Madame Nu had suggested that he talk first. Madame Nu had suggested that he first talk to her former Padawan, Takri. He'd been told she was fashion and hard to miss. Having never heard of the Fosh before, he had looked them up. Femur still hadn't been sure what to expect, but Madame Nu hadn't been lying. Takri had brilliant emerald and aquamarine plumage. Her beak and eyes were light blue. The contrast with her yellow robes made quite the ensemble.
Right, Femur, she said. I hear you've come to talk about my research. Would you like a copy of my own Jedi romance novel? I'm not sure it's relevant to my mission,
said Femur politely. Crichton had settled for leaning against one wall in Takri's office, seemingly ignoring them both, though Femur was sure the man was observing everything.
Oh, it's probably not. I just get us a little feedback from you and readers. I tried very hard to copy the stylistic tropes of the genre, but it has only been popular on non-humanoid worlds.
Well, that sounded like either an ominous or entertaining read.
I'd be happy to read it when I find the time, but if we could discuss your thoughts on the Mandalorians' dilemma. Oh, yes! I already had a copy before Madame Nu sent it to me, of course. It was such a shock to see it sent out to the whole order several days ago. I read the opening chapter of your thesis on non-Jedi perceptions of romance amongst the Jedi, said Femur.
He wasn't going to tell her that his favorite part had been when she had an appendix devoted entirely to euphemisms for a Jedi's lightsaber.
In your expert opinion, was the book written by a non-Jedi?
Takri thrilled softly.
It is very difficult to say. Quite unusually for the galaxy's romance novels about Jedi, there was nothing contradictory in the uses or explanations of the Force in the novel. But was a Jedi the writer or simply a consultant during or after the writing?
She shook her head.
That I don't know. I've been told it's also largely accurate to Mandalorian culture, so either the author is a Mandalorian, a Jedi, or someone who consulted both. And that's not mentioning their knowledge of the Mandalorian Wars a few thousand years ago. Ah, yes! The history knowledge and the way they wrote that visit to a very obvious Sith space station do suggest a Jedi wrote it, but it's possible it's just a very interested historian, she said with some doubt in her tone. Were there any names that came immediately to your mind as a potential author? Asked Femur cautiously, aware that this was a tricky subject. Maybe there are some core members who are bending some of the Order's rules. Oh, no, the core are all dedicated servants to the Force, she assured him.
Femur noted she had avoided saying they weren't bending the rules. He weighed whether it was better to try to finesse an answer out of her or be a lot more blunt. Her thesis made him think she was one who preferred the direct approach.
Takri, I'm not here to condemn them, said Femur. If they're not the author, I won't even mention them in my report regardless of whether they've married or have a family or whatever else they're getting up to. Well, excepting if they had turned to the dark side.
Takri cocked her head at the angle humans would find uncomfortable.
She prodded him with the Force.
Femur projected the sincerity of his intentions. "Well, I'm not one to gossip," said Decree, "but I have heard some things." She seemed lost in thought.
I imagine a lot are married,
Femur prompted. Decree trilled what he supposed was the sound of disagreement. "Not as many as you would think. There are a fair share with romantic and platonic life partners, it's true, but putting your duty as a Jedi after your duty to a spouse would go against the code. I have heard rumors that some in the Explore Corps have invented their own vows. A handful seem to have married into societies where the marriage vows don't contradict the code." She still seemed a bit reluctant.
How about this? I'll give you the list of names Madame Nu suggested I sort with, and you sort them according to most and least likely to be the author of the Mandalorians' dilemma, plus add any names you think have been missed.
Femur offered the data chip. Decree's mood brightened. "An excellent suggestion. Now, Femur, have you and your Mandalorian friend eaten yet? You can go to the refectory while I put the list together." He hadn't actually said that Crichton was Mandalorian, but you must have spotted the man's memories.
Thank you. We'll do that.
In the refectory, after getting their food, Femur had intended to just sit at one of the empty tables, but Crichton headed unerringly to a table of loud Explore Corps pilots. Unlike the Mirialan pilot of their ship, they were very friendly. When they found out Femur was here to find the author of the book, they all took turns giving increasingly silly reasons that they were the author. After being told that one of them had been possessed by an ancient Mandalorian and written it in their sleep, he thanked them for their time and went to dispose of his tray. Crichton followed. "You know, there's an ancient Mandalorian myth that the Kara are made up of the spirits of the fallen early Mandalores, and the Manda do guide the occasional Mandalorian," said Crichton. "So that last suggestion wasn't quite as ridiculous as that pilot thought." Unlike other Mandalorians who relied on their helmets to mask their faces, Crichton had an excellent sabacc face. Unfortunately for him, Femur now knew exactly what to look for when a Mandalorian was teasing him.
Let's save the extraordinary suggestions for after we've ruled out the ordinary ones,
said Femur. Crichton chuckled. "Fair enough." When they arrived back at Decree's office, she had the holoprojector on her desk up and running as she carefully rearranged names, presumably putting them in most likely order to be the author of the Mandalorian's dilemma. She motioned for them to sit down as she moved a final name before shutting off the projector. She handed him the data chip and he plugged it into his own pad. He was surprised to see that next to each name were absolute paragraphs of gossip and rumors about the Jedi in question. Each piece of info was sorted into a pro and con list to whether that particular Jedi was the author of the book.
This is impressively thorough, Decree. Thank you for your help.
"I'm not one for gossip, but I do have excellent hearing," said Decree demurely, as he read through a paragraph of speculation on whether or not a medical Jedi was involved in a polyamorous triad or a polykill with 5 other beings. Femur refrained from pointing out that despite what she kept saying, Decree was definitely one for gossip. "Yeah, what did you do on that base that has made them so desperate to kill you?" First sending an entire squad of 50 Verde after him, then bombing them from orbit. Yeah, must have seriously pissed them off. Yam was silent for a long moment. "I was near Malachor 5. The Force led me to a space station, which was running dark, no lights or transmissions. A beacon lit up once I was close and guided my ship inside, however. After landing, all I could sense through the Force was darkness and misery. There were cages of slaves in the hangar itself. I hid myself near the roof while some Mandalorians came to investigate my ship." What were Mandalorians doing on Malachor 5? It was a forbidden place, though Nared didn't remember why. Something about gravity shadows? It did possibly explain why they had called the place Harando.